was thinking, Rob, because we've talked through a number of different themes of sort of, the sort of defining intelligence, evidence gathering, working with it. We've talked about experimentation. We've talked a little bit about the application of the systems in the ecosystem and the landscape. If you were going to give advice to someone who's, starting out in the industry, or maybe they're taking their first sort of, more managerial role, what kinds of advice would you give them to take their first steps in sort of gathering and applying evidence to the way they work and how they solve their problems?
Probably two things, and one is maybe going to be very obvious to you and listeners. The other one will maybe a bit more not surprising, but off kilter. The first one is to become very, very familiar with data. And when I say familiar, being able to interpret data, understanding, you mentioned A/B testing, but being able to look at a very basic chart and understand what is the story to tell here. I mentioned with the podcast recommendation, behavioral sciences, and to understand what makes people tick. But being able to look at, take a large chunk of data, you've got 10,000 employees, and being able to very quickly put that into a pivot table and summarize just the data at a very basic level, I think is something that still many people struggle to do. So being able to do that within kind of a managerial level, particularly from a managerial level, because it increases the importance of being able to summarize what your team are doing and what's necessary. And I would expect this will be very outdated when I talk about pivot tables, because in the next month it will be in code interpreter in ChatGPT, and it will do it for us. But I think that would be my first top tip, is to become very familiar or literate in data. It doesn't mean going to do a data science course. It doesn't mean having to go on to various wonderful content providers and become certified, but being able to look at a chart and understand what it means. You don't have to be able to label axes, but again, being able to understand the story that you could then tell somebody and say, this is why it's important. And to refer back to something we said about content times and the completion rates, there's a sweet spot between 3 to 6 minutes based on all of our data that we show. Maybe we should change things. That's a really, I would say, easy thing to be able to learn. You could start to test that with data quite quickly to be able to come up with a very strong hypothesis of where things are moving. The second one, which ties into that kind of relationship management side, is this might sound snooty, but by the Financial Times weekend, it is less than £5 every weekend. You can subscribe to it. And the reason I say that is because it depends on the size of the organisation. But for someone like me that works with lots of enterprises, it is invaluable to be able to get a high-level overview of what's going on within various industries, whether that is merger and acquisitions, whether that is energy markets. You're able to come and speak to your client or your boss, whether consulting firm or whatever, from a very educated view, which gives you such credibility when you talk to people about why they should do things. If you can reference that what the competitor is doing this and you've just read about it in the Financial Times, I imagine most people's bosses' ears will prick up and go, yeah, maybe we should look at that a bit more too. And I think I've now used that tactic for the past 4 years. All my family laugh at me because I think I'm a real snob reading this pink newspaper on the weekends. But it is so valuable to get a wider perspective across nationalities or countries as well, because of the world element. And then you have the very business related element of, what is an organization doing well? Regardless of your age or your experience, I think that's a really valuable tool to just get that foundation of business insights and awareness. And just to be aware of other organisations' names, we talk about enterprises and FTSE 100s and NASDAQs and various things like that, but actually reading about those organisations and what they do is a fantastic best practice. I think that gives everybody the foundation, like I say, to be able to have a very good discussion, or at least a discussion that is based on the foundational awareness of what's going on.
There's something there about, you said, data literacy, which is, it feels really important, understanding sources, understanding what you can and can't do with them, their strengths and weaknesses, understanding, how they can be manipulated and how you can manipulate them, and how to do that, sort of with confidence of accuracy and truthfulness, etc. I think it's really interesting as well, sort of understanding those business dynamics more broadly than your own function, but also more broadly than your organization, your business, what's happening in the sector, what's happening in related sectors. I think there's something that I would add to that is I think those are brilliant, and I will steal them. I would add sort of testing and conversation as well. I think there's something that the value of conversations, back to that sort of relationship theme, is almost a useful way of testing it before you even get to a hypothesis. You think, I've read this, or I've seen that, or I've just noticed this in a report. You have that conversation just with your peers, with your networks. Test your thinking before you look before you leap, in a sense. Conversationally, I think can be really helpful as well.
Have you heard of the Amazon press release strategy when they pitch a new project?
I don't know that I have, no.
So whenever it's a new product idea or a project, there's a rule in Amazon, and there's loads of, there's so many people that will probably be able to tell us more about Amazon and read detailed books of the way they work. But there's two things that I love, and I've tried this at varying scales with teams that I've managed. One is to be able to write a detailed document about the meeting. And if it's an hour meeting, you force everybody to read that document within the first 10 minutes. So nobody has an excuse of not reading the document or pretending that they've read the document. And it means that you can then have 50 minutes of detailed conversation. Did that at a previous role, and it was very awkward for the first couple of weeks, but it was fantastic to be able to get everybody to have a detailed discussion, like I said. But the one that relates to your point in terms of testing is to validate any product improvement or functionality or feature at Amazon. Supposedly they have to write the press release first.
Okay.
So you reverse engineer it and go, this is what it will do, and this is exactly who it will be for, this is how we're going to sell this. And I adore that idea of being able to think about the end product at first. You test that with your audience, and you pitch that and go, does this actually feel like it solves the problem if I describe it this way? And then we'll go and do it. And you have this kind of that North Star metric of this press release to say, as long as we fulfill what's in the press release, then we're good. We've had approval. We know it will make an impact within the organization.
You hear yourself say it out loud, and they said, does that sound convincing?
Yeah,
it's interesting. I worked with an advertising client. This is before I joined Fosway, some years ago now. I was working with them on the kind of operations and the business planning to set up a learning function for the advertising industry. So a learning service, really, to try and help develop entry-level skills in the advertising sector. And they were wondering how to go about that, what kind of programs to create. And what they did, they promoted some free webinars just on their sort of top 5, I think it was, topics, just to see what's the response. Do people, are people interested? They weren't even necessarily going to run the webinars. It was just sort of market testing exercise. And they did then run a few of the webinars, and that then helped them test, okay, and the ones that we know there's interest, create a light touch sort of half-hour webinar. Have we got the right spokespeople, the right expertise? Have they got the provenance? How do we manage the event? And so they kind of tested their way in right the way through to launch, which is kind of, it was interesting. They weren't live yet, so they didn't, they could do it more in development testing, which gave them a bit more of the freedom. But it's interesting, an example of that, experiment and test your way into confidence, gather the data you don't even know you need yet by trying it out, and suck it and see, which is interesting.